It has to be something that you couldn't have easily done before Shabbos and to have the same quality. So says the Rambam that over here as well, because you can light the flame before Shabbos and you don't need to do it on Yom Tov, therefore Chazal didn't allow you to light a new one on Yom Tov. So he's seemingly adding to what the Gemara says a simple reason, because you're creating something new or the appearance of something new. The Rambam says it's also because it could have been done before Yom Tov. The Pri Chadash, one of the early Achronim, explains that we need these two reasons in source 12. And he says that if you were to just have the reason of not being able to do it before Yom Tov, you would think, what if I lit my candle before Yom Tov? And I did that already. And then it went out. So I don't have this other reason that I couldn't have done before Yom Tov because the wind came and blew it out or and so on and so forth. So comes the Gemara and says a second reason that even if that reason doesn't apply and you don't have the issue of having taken care of it before Yom Tov, you still have the secondary issue of it wasn't something that was there. It wasn't. You have the issue of noilet, the issue of the appearance of something new, and therefore it's not allowed. Interestingly, the Kaf HaChaim over here in Siman Taf Tzadikei, one of the important Sephardi poskim, he brings some opinions that Taka say that if you prepared it before Yom Tov and the light goes out, it's mutter to light it again. Meaning it's again, what does he do with the Gemara? It's a little complex, but yeah, many of the Gedolei Achronim take that approach. But the Kaf HaChaim said the accepted opinion, and this is the way we practice, and you'll see the Alter Rebbe seems to imply this as well. Then no, even if you don't have, if you haven't taken care of both reasons, even if you didn't prepare it before Yom Tov, you need both. And the Alter Rebbe in source 14 quotes both of these reasons. As the appearance of doing something new. And then he says, so the implication is that both are an issue, and why taka you need both reasons? It's in other words, seemingly you can just say the reason of the Gemara. What are we really adding with this reason? That's an interesting question that needs to be dealt with, but halacha l'maisa, as the Pri Chadash says in source 12, and the way the Kaf HaChaim paskins, even if you just have the reason of the Rambam and you took care of that and you lit it before Yom Tov and it's now extinguished, you wouldn't be allowed to do it. Okay, so that's the general consensus, the way the Mishnah Berurah and the Alter Rebbe and most poskim paskin, that midei raisa you're allowed to light a flame on Yom Tov. The Rabbanon came and added a restriction. The 2 days of the Taz, one of the important poskim, and interestingly the Pri Megadim goes with this approach, and there are some Gedolei Achronim that take on this approach. They say no, lighting a new flame on Yom Tov is Asur min HaTorah, and it's not an issue d'Rabbanan. And that's how we learn in source 13. Lo yitira HaTorah, yesh mi'ayin lo yitira HaTorah. And based on that, it would be a very practical nafkamina, a question that people ask all the time. What happens if my flame went out? What happens if I forgot to light my candles? And we're going to see certain more practical examples as we go along. What do I do? So we know when you have something that's only asur midrabanan, and it's for the need of a mitzvah, you can ask a Gentile to do it, straight out. So therefore, according to the Alter Rebbe and the Pri Chadash and the others, because it's only an asur midrabanan, you forgot to heat up your Yom Tov food. Cooking your Yom Tov food is a little more complicated. You have a issue of bishalakum and so on and so forth, but just heating up your food, that would be permissible on Yom Tov, according to the Alter Rebbe, but according to the Taz and the Pri Megadim and others, this would be an issue. So bottom line, you could ask a guy because it's only an issue with the Rabbanon. So to summarize, lighting a flame is part of the actual cooking process, as the Alter Rebbe was mechadish. And therefore on Yom Tov it's permissible. And min HaTorah you're allowed to even light a new flame. The Chachamim said 2 reasons why you can't do it. One, because it could have been done before, and even if it couldn't have been done before, it has the appearance of creating something new, and that's an issue on Shabbos. The classical example that many are familiar with, there's 2 opinions in the Gemara, in the end of the 4th chapter of Masechta Shabbos. The Gemara says you can't melt snow on Shabbos. So the way Rashi explains that, You can't melt snow on Shabbos. It's the same reason. You can't squeeze snow to extract water because it has the appearance of creating something new. It's a nissa d'Rabbanan. Another example that's also brought in Masechtas Beya in this context, the third example of the appearance of creating something new is to create. So this is an interesting example on Sukkos. If you want to replace your napkin around your esrog, would that be permissible on Sukkos with a new napkin? There's a potential issue of creating a smell on Yom Tov. Again, this is also the way Rashi explains that it's the appearance of creating a new smell on Yom Tov. Okay, page 3. Question is, what happens if I accidentally violated this rabbinical prohibition? And I went ahead and lit my candle. I didn't know. Then what? Could you benefit from the light? So this is one of the common shilas that come. Rabbi, I made a mistake. Now what? So interestingly, in halacha, when it comes to an isser min Torah, oftentimes we take a stricter approach b'diavad post facto. But on the counter side, there's a number of isurim that Rabbanon, like Shehiyah and Amir al-Nachri, were post facto or even stricter. So what's the din over here on Yom Tov? If a mistake was made on Yom Tov, could the food be consumed or not? So this is clear in the Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe, based on the Magen Avraham, and this next sif, that over here by Yom Tov, the Chachamim did not impose a knas, and we gave a post facto b'diavad if the flame was lit, and you forgot, and so on and so forth. That would be permissible in source 14, and the same applies to all isurim on Yom Tov. All isurim that are on Yom Tov, the post facto b'diavad, it would be mutter. Okay. This is interesting historically. Some of my side reading, I'm in the middle of reading a biography about Thomas Edison. So around that time, so around that time, you'll see in source 17, the Aruch HaShulchan, the Rav from the Vardik. So the rabbis were just getting acquainted with electricity, and this is not in the published works of the Aruch HaShulchan. The Mincha Shlomo, Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, quotes this in his first volume of Responsum Semichas in the footnote 5. So he says the Aruch HaShulchan in a journal called the Beis Vad L'Chachamim was the first Rav to address electricity on Yom Tov. And his understanding of electricity at the time, he was born 1829. And I brought Thomas Edison's dates as well. He was born 1847. But they lived in the same era. So electricity was just becoming popularized. In New York, you can imagine, it took another 20, 30 years to come to Europe. Actually, France was competing with Thomas Edison. Okay, then they felt they came up with electricity before him. So these American, certain things don't change. So sometimes the Gresed HaChachamim take longer to get things done. It's more the less sophisticated Bari Poyol they get things done. So the Aruch HaShulchan wanted to make an interesting deduction. He wanted to say, let's look at this. What's electricity in his understanding at the time? Electricity is not something new. You're essentially, there's the generator, there's the current. That was they used to have a big generator. The whole Manhattan was fired up by one big generator, maybe the size of half the sukkah, and you can see pictures of it. And so here's the fire. It's showing given, and the electricity just kicks into that. So on Yom Tov, the Aruch HaShulchan said you can turn on a light, you can turn on a candle, you can turn on anything powered by electricity, because essentially you're just taking it from something that existed before. So he wanted to say that on Shabbos you can't do it, it's an issue d'Rabbanan. But on Yom Tov, where if it was pre-existing and you're just continuing the current, it's mutter. But all the poskim, as Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he was one of the big poskim that his first sefer that popularized Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was on electricity. We'll see a little bit from his sefer on page 4, Moedei Eish, page 5. So the Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he says no. And again, all the poskim in that same journal, and I think it even came out right away, they all said no, this is a complete misunderstanding. And taka, every time you turn on a light, even though it's based on the generator, but there's still a new Dovi, you can give us more lumdus to this, but there's something new happening. And that's actually very important to note in modern day stoves. I quote this in source 18 for the Yeshivas. So normally, practically speaking, if you're blessed with us like with an old oven, so you actually on Yom Tov you're in a better space. We have one of those older gas stovetops, and if the flame's on Yom Tov, you can make it bigger. Expanding a flame is permissible. But as the Yeshivas and all the poskim point out, nowadays many gas ranges, every time you pull the temperature up a little bit, there's an electronic kick in, and therefore it's important that even if in your the stoves you grew up with and the lameds and the chafs, it was permissible to grow the flame on Yom Tov, most of the newer stoves don't have that ability. So therefore, if you want to put your flame up, you would have to ask a guy. Okay. So now we're going to discuss. So now we basically laid down that it's mutter to light from a pre-existing flame. Are there any exceptions to this rule? So the Shulchan Aruch brings a machlokes, the Mechaber and the Ramah. The Mechaber takes, in other words, are there limitations on lighting from a pre-existing flame? Do you need, if you could have lit this flame before Yom Tov, do you have to have done that? So the Shulchan Aruch says no, and that's the way the Svardim would paskin. But the Ramah in source 20 says v'yesh machmirim, that a pre-existing flame and cooking food from a pre-existing flame, if the taste of the food would not have been affected by doing it the day early or 2 days early, you have to do it before Yom Tov. But over here he gives you a little bit of way out. He says, if you didn't do that, because you're dealing with Nisud Rabbanon, on top of a Nisud Rabbanon, if you do it with a variation, you cook it a little differently, the place can say you chop your chicken on the counter instead of on a platter, so on and so forth, is permitted. So the Ramah says that if the food could have been done, so we're bringing now exception number 1 to this rule, that if the food could have been prepared beforehand, even from a pre-existing flame, it would not be allowed to prepare it on Yom Tov. The good news is that this is very rare. There's really not a lot of dishes that taste better from 2 days ago. But the poskim do, you see the Alter Rebbe quotes it in source 22, we'll come to the Kuntrus Achron in a minute. The Alter Rebbe says Lakshan, for example. Lakshan is an example of something that if it's made a couple days earlier, it makes the lakshan better. I don't know exactly what type of lakshan he's talking about, but there was some sort of lakshan, artenu lakshan. So I was actually giving a shiur on some of these halachas in the past couple of weeks. So one of the examples, a more relevant example that I was thinking of, was baked apples. I thought in my mind, if you bake the apple a day or two early, and it soaks in the juice, it's going to be a more geschmackes baked apple. So I made a poll on my family WhatsApp between the experts, and I said, do you think a baked apple, and you can, this is very subjective, so everyone can, again, you have to come up with what's the halachic example over here of this unique dish that, if prepared early, would be better. So I thought a baked apple, but the conclusion was a 50-50 between the experts on the group. So I asked Rebbe Kasima what he thought. He wasn't sure. So anyway, Perhaps baked apples should be made earlier, but hameko yesh le'am al lismich. I don't know what the practical example would be of something that's better made early in today's contemporary society. If anyone can think of something.
Flavor is enhanced one day after.
So what's an what's a dish that you would say is better made a day early?
Cook, maybe make like the mayo, 24 hours, it makes the flavor.
Mayonnaise. Okay, we have a food expert here. Okay, so I guess every housewife, or if the husbands are hopefully helping as well, will have to make a practical assessment as to how this applies. Okay, so interestingly, the Ber Moshe, I have the Lizchus to do shimush by his amical, the Rebbe Tzvi, and I go into New York once a month, so I'm partial to the Rebbe Tzvi, one of the great poskim of the previous generation. Actually, I'll just mention that Achagav, he came by the Rebbe once. You can find this on the video, and the Rebbe asked him to make a psak din, Mashiach should come, and he wasn't so comfortable with the idea. So we're trying to get his amical to sign up psak din. Okay, so the Rebbe Tzvi addresses an interesting question. He says, wait a second. With the invent of refrigeration, one can make an argument that this halacha is going to have very widespread ramifications. One can say, with refrigerators, everything that's made and you put it in the refrigerator and heat it up, so everything tastes good, cooked 2 days earlier. So maybe now with refrigerators and proper preservations, you shouldn't be allowed to cook on Yom Tov based on the Ramah, because everything could have been done. Without this effort. So the Rebbe Tzvi, what? So you warm it up, yeah. But so again, the food. So the part that you could have done before, you have to do before. Yeah, you're making a good point to warm it up, Taka. But so he says simply again, for the person asking the question was maybe lived a little bit too much in the books. He was learning too much Samach Vov. So if you have anything that is refrigerated and then warmed up, the quality goes down a notch. If you ever have Shabbos leftovers on Sundays, it's not the same. So the Rebbe Tzvi, sometimes what makes a good posek? Someone that doesn't just know halacha, but he understands the reality of the world. And then he says something very interesting. He said, this is now, Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is quoted in source 24. He says, okay, wait a second. I understand, yes, refrigerated food is not the same. So we don't have to do everything before. Anything that goes down a notch can be prepared before Yom Tov. But wait a second. Your hot water. Water doesn't, the hot water, you should have to cheshbon. Now we have a 3-day Yom Tov. Everything you need for the next all the water you need for the next 3 days. And out of Yom Tov, you can't add any water to your hot water urn, because water is something that doesn't change kihuzeh. So therefore, you would have to do everything before Yom Tov. So the Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says an interesting chap. He says 2 points. He says first of all, it's an added expense. It's an added expense. If you're, again, maybe when this was first written, they used to heat up their water on a china, a pot of hot water. So, Yiddish geld, dealing with a few dollars, but the water is going to evaporate, and you're going to be wasting water and wasting, having your electricity on longer than you need it. And again, you're dealing with prutis, but he says Chazal, so we're not going to make you do that. It's a shtick chiddush, but that's what he says.
What did you need in water? What did you need based on the mind shliach? What did you need the commander? They use water. They put it
It's a machlokes rishonim. That's a different. That's in relation to chametz. Is the water going to be too hot, too cold? It's not in relation to the quality of the water per se. That's a separate. That's a chametz factor. So I can't read that last line. It's cut off. But what he says as well that if you didn't realize. Anyways, the bottom line, the olim is not makbid to prepare their water beforehand, and maybe it's based on this concept. If it's going to waste so much, you don't have to do it. But it's interesting, for the pre-existing flame, that you have to light before. Over here, on that chumrah of the Ramah, so you're dealing with a chumrah on top of a chumrah. Could be. It's an interesting svara. Going back, I skipped the Kuntres Achim of the Alter Rebbe in source 21. A very fascinating chiddush. The Chalal in general with Lizchus Yom Tov, and I'll briefly mention it as well regarding Hilchos Beider. So we have a general question. Whenever Torah permits something, the question is it mutter or is it like we allow it? In other words, is it that when the Torah says you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov, it's completely mutter, 100%? Or is it that if you need to, we'll let you do it? What's the nafkamina? The nafkamina is, should you try to find a way to violate a little bit less? So the practical example the poskim discuss, so the Alter Rebbe concludes that on Yom Tov, it's hutra. Cooking on Yom Tov, when we allow it, it's not that it's t'chuya tutra. Therefore, the poskim say, quoted from Rabbi Yashiv and others, that when you're making a tea on Yom Tov, if it's t'chuya, you should try to make it pouring from a klisheni, a klishlishi, to try to, if you can easily not make it bishul, just make it not bishul. Says the Alter Rebbe, no, it's hutra, and therefore you don't have to, if you can easily find a way out, you don't have to do that. The Alter Rebbe says the same thing is regarding boider. Boider on Yom Tov is a little complicated, but basically, that we say there's three types of boider. There's three scenarios of boider. So boider is generally taking the bad from the good. So you have a cup of coffee and a bug falls in. I want to take the bug out. So generally we say on Yom Tov that it's mutter to take the bug out. It's mutter to take the bug out. Unless it's easier to take the good from the bad. So if it's easier, so then we say to take the good from the bad. But if it's the same level of effort to take the good from the bad and the bad from the good, we say you can choose whichever you want. So the Rebbe says from that, we see that boirer on Yom Tov is hutra. It's completely permissible. Because if you have a choice, and they're both equal amount of effort, you would think that maybe do the less prohibited, the one that has less yisur, because it's hutra, therefore it's completely permissible. Okay. This is going to get a little bit into the weeds. I'm going to give it over to Kitzer. But those that don't fully follow this next 2 minutes, we're on the bottom of page 4, that's fine. This involves some background knowledge in a couple of other areas of Hilchos Shabbos and Yom Tov, but it's actually quite relevant. So, just kind of in parentheses, in relation to heating up hot water on Yom Tov. So there's two practical halachic questions. So we have something in halacha called a psik reisha. Any psik reisha. Something that's not for sure going to happen. So if let's say you're going to do a certain act, and it's possible that act would cause a malacha, but it's possible that it's not. So that's called an ene psik reisha. You have an ene psik reisha by something that's midrabanon, midairaisa. So the Alter Rebbe has, and Rabbi Gedassi in source 25 quotes it, and Simon Reishai and Zayin. Alter Rebbe has a unique chumrah. Mishnah Berurah takes a more lenient perspective on this question, and he says, the Alter Rebbe says, and Rabbi Gedassi quotes from Rav and Tishrei, Lubavitcher Rav, that he heard this gedank from. It's in his footnotes there. I just want to point out that I received a different Messiah in relation to this psak. But he basically concludes in his Sefer Shmiras Hamoedim, if anyone, Hilchas Yom Tov is complex. If anyone ever wants to see a nice practical summary of Hilchas Yom Tov, it's about 40 pages. So Rabbi Gedassi in the Shmiras Hamoedim, it's a very good sikul. I try to review that twice a year for Yom Tov. So, because Hilchas Yom Tov is very, very complicated. So many moving parts, and every housewife wants to know, there's so much like I said, it's Hilchas Shabbos on steroids. And it's only twice a year, 3 times a year, so it's easy to forget the details. 39 malachas, and a handful of them are mutter, and even those that are mutter are only mutter in certain cases, and the Raisa, the Rabbanans, so anyway, so bottom line, he says, that what's the Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe? Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe is that in those cases where we allow something that's not a psik reisha, it's only if it's not a psik reisha b'mitzias, which means, let's say I'm doing something and it may lead to another effect and it may not. If there's a way to do research and to ascertain if that's going to happen or not, and I don't have the capability to do that research, then the Alter Rebbe holds that's not considered an any psikration. Just because you don't know if it's not going to happen, if you can do a little testing and spend 10 minutes and figure out, certain toilets, they turn something on every time you flush, so if you know every 14th flush it's going to do it, then it's not a psikration because you don't know if it's the 14th time. Mishnah Berurah would consider that a psikration. So therefore, when reloading a hot water heater, so the Mishnah Berurah takes a lenient approach regarding that type of thing, that it may ignite the hot water, the thermometer to turn on, and it may not. So the Mishnah Berurah would say, it's not psik reisha, so it's mutter. Yom Tov is the Rabbanon, so it's mutter. Safek by the Rabbanon. So he wants to argue that the Alter Rebbe would hold that you can't do it on Yom Tov. Why? Because you can do research here. For Yom Tov, test your thing, find out how much, which level, how much water you put in, is it going to turn it on. So it's not considered any specifically to psik, so you can't fill up your hot water urn even on Yom Tov. By Brian, another Rabbanim that I discussed this with, said this is a mistake. And said that it is permissible to do it on Yom Tov. And this chumrah of the Alter Rebbe is only by Shabbos. Shabbos is the Yikori B'Deiraisa, this is the Rabbanon, on top of it the Rabbanon, on top of it the Rabbanon. So therefore you could fill your hot water on Shabbos, despite this chumrah of the Alter Rebbe in Shabbos. Okay. Page 5. Just some another important ha'ara regarding filling hot water urns practically on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. If you look at the Starcase website, they actually did a lot of what the Starcase is best for and worst for. The Rabbi Heinemann is a major machadish. He was the one that invented the Shabbos mode on these ovens. So he has a very unique chiddush on Yom Tov that you're allowed to turn the temperature up and down on Yom Tov. It's a grama, the grama. Anyway, maybe we could discuss that at some other point. But the Starcase is very good for doing a lot of research. So they did research on hot water urns, and they said that they said that if you generally fill up a hot water urn in most cases it's not going to turn the light on. In other words, not filling it up. Taking hot water, some poskim were suggesting they could only take the hot water when the hot water urn is going. But when it's off, you might take some hot water and it's going to make the light go on. So they did research and they said it's a myth. Never when you take hot water from the cup does it turn the light on or turn it off, and therefore many poskim are leaving. Yom Tov for sure would be permissible. Okay, here's the big question. Up until now we're talking about cooking. And for a pre-existing flame, it would be permissible to cook on Yom Tov so long that it wouldn't have been better before. Question is, what about those who would like to come a little closer? I can't scream that loud. What? Same thing, okay, yeah. So I'm used to having to outspeak people that are speaking in my shiur, so this is so this is a famous dispute in the first chapter of Masechtas Beya that actually is going to have major ramifications for when Mashiach comes. Do we say when Chazal permitted certain things on Yom Tov that it was permitted only for food-related matters, or do we say mitoich shehutra l'tzorech, being that it became permissible for the needs of food, we also allow you to use it for non-food-related matters. So, for example, if you want to light a candle on Yom Tov, not for food, would that be permissible? So Beis Hillel is of the opinion that it's allowed. Beis Shammai says no, you're only allowed to light from a pre-existing flame something that's there to enhance your food. Another example is carrying. We allow you to carry for food-related matters. Could you carry your lulav to shul? So Beis Shammai would say no. You can't push your baby on Yom Tov where there's no Erev, because we only allow you to carry for a tzedach. So as soon as Mashiach comes, we're going to pass like Beis Shammai. Hilchos Yom Tov is going to completely transform Hilchos Yom Tov. There's going to be a lot of inherent chumras in Hilchos Yom Tov. So in source 27, the Alter Rebbe summarizes that yes, we pass like Beis Hillel, and we're much more permissive. But there are certain inherent limitations, and this we discussed a year ago. You could find it on Rabbi Itkin's YouTube channel, the taking showers on Yom Tov. So one of the rules is that we only allowed it for a Yom Tov need that's universal, for Yidden. All that Rebbe says by Yidden. So if it's just something that most people don't need, and you kind of want it, then it wouldn't be allowed. But if it's something that like everyone wants to push their babies to shul, everyone wants to carry their talis to shul, so then that's permissible. Another is it has to be l'tzorech Yom Tov. It's not for some just other need, your enjoyment of Yom Tov, or a tzorech of a mitzvah that its time's going to pass, and it has to be a personal benefit for the body. So two very fascinating examples that the Shulchan Aruch clearly says would not be allowed to burn on Yom Tov. One is quoted in Hilchos Yom Tov, Siman Tov Kuvov, source 28. The other is in Hilchos Pesach. You brought up Pesach, so we're going to have an interesting example. In Tov Kuvov, the Shulchan Aruch says that if you make challah on Yom Tov, you separate the challah, you can burn the dough, which the minhag is to burn it. And the Alter Rebbe has an interesting chiddush that one shouldn't save the challah dough for more than 30 days. Some people have the minhag, they make challah, they put it in the freezer, they save it there, they burn it once a year on Pesach. The Rebbe says there's an isser to leave the challah dough around for more than 30 days because someone might accidentally come to use it. But for 1 day or 2 days, the Shulchan Aruch says you can't burn it on Yom Tov. We'll see soon why in a minute. Chaver is a tzorech mitzvah. But what are you missing? It's not a mitzvah that you need for now. It's a mitzvah that can be done. It can be done after Yom Tov, so therefore it's fine. So the challah case is easier to explain. The more complex case is Siman Tov Memvav. Shulchan Aruch says you didn't do a thorough enough job checking for chametz. You find we've had this case. You find especially if you're this only happened once. We were Pesach in some colony with some other families, and anyway, we found a bag of bizili behind the thing. They officially cleaned it for Pesach already, right? So the Shulchan Aruch says on Hamoed you could burn it. On Pesach, on Yom Tov you can't. You have to cover with a kli and then wait till after. Why not? on Yom Tov, you could burn l'tzaydich mitzvah for today. What's the reasoning? Tzadam, it's a divash, the Rishayim. So the Shlomo Zalman Auerbach in source 30 gives an interesting haggadah to explain what's the reason why this would be an exception and you can't burn these two items. He says that when you learn halacha from one place to another place, it has to have a resemblance. And therefore, yes, we do extend the Havara allowance to non-food related items, but it has to be in a similar style. And in these two cases, what's the similar style? That I'm actively benefiting now. When I'm doing an act of destruction that has no resemblance to the cooking process, it's like a passive benefit in sorts. And therefore, again, this is the halacha. He's giving a beer, but that's so. Bottom line, we have exceptions to this rule that you're only allowed to do something that's universally needed. So, for example, if I want to use hot water to clean my hands on Yom Tov, so the Shulchan Aruch says, clean your face and your hands and your toes, minority of your body, with hot water is mutter on Yom Tov. Because you can't take a whole shower, that's what we discussed a year ago. You can see more about that then, but just to wash your hands with hot water, it's mutter on Yom Tov. Use hot water to wash dishes is mutter on Yom Tov. It's a pre-existing flame, most households. Even if not, it's a gramo. Anyway, we discussed that a year ago. And therefore it's permissible. Why is the washing your hands permissible? Because it's a universal need. It's a need for now. But these other examples of burning the challah, burning the chametz would not be permissible. That's one of the reasons why taking a shower, the generally accepted opinion is that we don't take hot showers on Yom Tov, because taking a daily hot shower is not a universal need yet. People take showers 3 times a day, 3 times a week. But anyway, extending it further in source 31, this is based on a Yerushalmi. Yeshivas says that if it's a candle to honor a shul, this is actually very fascinating. Someone was asking me a shaila a few months ago, where they have a shul where it's like a small shul, and they make the kiddush in the shul room, and they don't come back for mincha. And the guy comes a couple hours later to clean up. So his question was, would they be allowed start cleaning up the shul? It's kind of preparing for the next day because they don't need the shul for mincha. Is there any reason for them to clean the shul then? So at the time I spoke to a few Rabbanan about it, but then I saw this halacha and it's mamish clear over here. This Yerushalmi answers the question. This Yerushalmi, the way the Rebbe says, lighting a candle, even if you're going to leave the shul right after, and you're just giving the shul that respect for a moment, not only is it mutter, it's mutter to light that candle in the shul, even if you don't need the light, to honor the shul. Yesh mitzvah l'oisei shah. There's a mitzvah of honoring the shul at that moment. So what the Poskim said is that the shul is a pigsty. You should clean it up before you leave, just for to have that the momentary respect. If it's the guy's going to come and do that, but basically, but there is an inyan to respect the shul even for 5 minutes while you're there before you leave, and if it's mutter to do this to light this candle on Yom Tov.
Also, it's talking about Bu'ur.
What?
Also, it's talking about Bu'ur.
What's going on? Bonfires?
I'm saying that's why a flock of snails.
Right.
You're applying it also clean.
Oh, you're saying, yeah, correct. Any sort of cover for the shul, l'chayra, that would be allowed. And again, but for not over here, you're not doing an isser, meaning you're Chana, but I'm saying you're not doing a malacha per se. We allow even a quote unquote malacha that's hutra, but we allow something that's also derabbanan, only permissible in certain cases. Let's say Yom Tov, to honor the shul for 5 minutes. So, but another exception on page 6 is an interesting machlokes apaiskim. The Taz and the Magen Avram, and there's a possible idea in the Alter Rebbe over here. The Shulchan Aruch says, ner sher batola. If it's a candle, let's call it a vanity candle. So what is a vanity candle? So the way the Taz explains this is, it's not to honor Yom Tov, it's not to honor Shabbos, it's just to show off your wealth. You know, some people want to, show that he's, let's say the room needs 10 candles. So he's going to light 20 candles just to have that glory. So the Taz says something very interesting as a limud schus. Taz says, quotes from the Hershel, it's a Reicha line. He says, when a Yid shows his wealth on Yom Tov, someone showing off his wealth on Yom Tov, for sure he's intending for the honor of the day, and therefore it's permissible. The Magen Avraham disagrees, but if you look at the Alter Rebbe, it's mashma that he's alluding to the Taz. The Alter Rebbe in source 34 says, Ner Shabbatara, Ainu she'ein tzorech loy klal. He has in the word klal. You have no need at all for today. It's mashma that even if there's this abstract benefit for the day, it would be permissible. So practically, based on this extension, we're machmer to light on the first day of Yom Tov candles before Yom Tov, so as to have a parallel for Shabbos. Shabbos you have to light before. Yom Tov, the minig is, matafrayim, the place can say that we light before. But if he didn't, you can light on Yom Tov. Why? It's this halacha. And there for a mitzvah, could be lit on Yom Tov, a pre-existing flame. We'll discuss a couple practical takeaways for lighting on Yom Tov in a second. But another example the Shulchan Aruch talks about that wouldn't be allowed is lighting a flame for incense. Shulchan Aruch uses that as an example for even a pre-existing flame wouldn't be allowed. Why? Because that's considered a luxury item, and it wasn't something that everyone did. And we only allow you to light a flame on Yom Tov. So to give a mashal from today's contemporary shluchim, could you do hookah in the sukkah, a pre-existing flame, on Yom Tov? Or a big example, and I purposely left this out, the place can have a huge discussion. We have an extra few minutes, I'll give you the cliff notes of this. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch brings a list of 7 rules if you're going to smoke on Yom Tov. But one of the big questions of smoking on Yom Tov is it a universal need? The place came already 150 years ago. I found this interesting. I thought the numbers were higher. They said even though smoking is very prevalent, the majority of people don't smoke. So therefore, that's a big shiloh. The argument to allow smoking is because once someone starts to smoke, he becomes addicted. And it's such a tzorech that you can't back out. What? It's mamas, yeah. It's a huge need. Your whole Semichas Achag is going to be diminished. The placing of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says that if you're going to smoke on Yom Tov, you have to black out the words on every cigarette because you're erasing the words if you smoke it. He says as well that you shouldn't light a match to the candle. You should light it directly from the flame because that in-between match would be shaloi l'tzorech. But again, the place may have a big discussion about smoking, but like using cigars. People don't get addicted to cigars for the most part. Cigars is like a luxury item. You smoke a cigar once a week with your chaverim, right? I think my brother-in-law had cigars and scotch last night. So that's not an addictive item. That l'chayda would be mugmar to do on Yom Tov, to smoke a cigar or a pipe, even more for someone that does it only for pleasure. It's a big shiloh. Interestingly, in Sefer Menhagim, the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't smoke on Yom Tov. Frierdiker Rebbe didn't smoke on Yom Tov because of this. And on Rosh Hashanah, he was other reasons. He said, in other words, you look in that famous letter about Rosh Hashanah. He says, "Yesh machmir not to smoke on Yom Tov." For sure, on Rosh Hashanah you shouldn't smoke. So that's this whole discussion is that smoking on Yom Tov is it's a shiloh. I'm not going to say it's usher because certain people push and need it, but it's not so push.
It wasn't allowed before, but I heard it's a number of years ago.
I mean, again, this obviously doesn't get into the pikuach nefesh issues to begin with, and so on and so forth. But I didn't want to get into smoking because it goes down a whole different. It's a sugi of shavu l'chol nefesh, which we discussed more last year.
Or it's Rabbi Leger from the Kollel, it says the Rabbi Leger from the Kollel said that smoking is not healthy.
That's why they also do this.
Okay. So we'll come back to some practical takeaways, some practical instructions for lighting candles on Yom Tov, but just to take this a step further to yartzait candles and yizkor candles. So the Bir Halacha says, okay, so the Shulchan Aruch says for a mitzvah, you're allowed to light a candle. So you forgot to light your yartzait candle, you have yartzait on Yom Tov, could you light this yartzait candle? So you see from the language of the posting when they discuss yartzait candles, that it's one of these societal minhagim that evolved way beyond what was initially intended. It became this very emotional thing. Le'aleinu, people that lost parents. It's a very personal experience. People are very connected to their yartzeit candles. The Rebbe talks about. Okay, so yartzeit candles. So you forgot. Do you have to ask a guy to light it, or could the yid light the yartzeit candle or pre-existing flames? The Bir Halacha is not sure. Is it a mitzvah? It's not a mitzvah. We have this concept of mitzvah. So the 613 mitzvahs, right? You're allowed to do something with tzerich mitzvah. So in Hilchos Shabbos, it says certain things, Nisud Rabbanan, you can do with tzerich mitzvah. Is achnasa tzerichim et tzerich mitzvah? So the Shulchan Aruch says clearly, depends. If it's a neighbor from next door, that's not achnasa. Has to be an out-of-town guest. The tzerich mitzvah is more. The term mitzvah is not as broad in every area of halacha. So the Bir Halacha is trying to figure out, is this, when the Shulchan Aruch says there's a mitzvah and you can light it from a pre-existing flame, is this a mitzvah, is it not a mitzvah? He's back and forth, is it honoring your parents, so on and so forth. So the ideal recommendation the Mishnah Berurah brings is that you should light it either in a place where you're going to personally benefit by your meal, on the table, so you're going to eat it, or light it in the shul, so it's clearly covered Yom Tov, but it's not so pashut. Another question is, what about a yizkor candle? People have yizkor. This is more common because everyone does yizkor every So interestingly, the Rebbe says our minhag is not to light a yizkor candle. In source 36, could be this minhag by Sarab and so on and so forth. Many people light yizkor candles, and Yom Kippur would be an exception. Over there, that Amal says the minhag is that everyone lights a candle for their parents, but the other ones not. Just to conclude with a couple interesting, relevant halachas regarding lighting candles on Yom Tov. So one is regarding making an eruv tafshilin, which we're going to be doing this year for the third time. So normally we say that the eruv tafshilin is for food, to be able to prepare food on Yom Tov for Shabbos. It should be fully finished beforehand. Is it permissible? What happens, and this is a shaila that I've gotten a few times, if you have some bachurim or some girls that are living in a dorm, and they're going to be lighting Yom Tov candles, Shabbos candles, and they're not going to be eating there, they're not doing any cooking, nothing. Do they need to make an eruv tafshilin? This is a big question in the poskim. And if you look at the language of the eruv tafshilin, it's ladluki neda. There is a strong argument that you should light a candle just to enable you to light those. Because that's the one example where you're lighting on Yom Tov a candle for the next day, but it's also permitting you to light the Yom Tov candle. And therefore the recommendation in the poskim generally that I was makabel was they should make an eruv tafshilin without a bracha. They should make an eruv tafshilin if they're not going to be eating there. But everyone should consult with their Rav regarding that shayla. The Shulchan Aruch says in Siman Tov Kuf Aleph that if you're preparing the candles and you want to remove the wax to make room for the new candle that melted the earlier days. So on Yom Tov, it's permissible to move the wax, the Shulchan Aruch says. The Shabbos Kolchasa brings actually an interesting Alter Rebbe. The wax people used to reuse their wax. So Alter Rebbe held it wasn't muktzah. Nowadays, when that's not done, the Shabbos Kolchasa recommends when you take out the wax, you should put it straight into the garbage so as not to have a muktzah issue. If you have two candles, interestingly, the Shulchan Aruch says in Tav Kuf Yudalit, if your candles are stuck together, could you separate them on Yom Tov? So the Shulchan Aruch says you would be allowed to, because they only stuck together. The factory didn't mean for them to stick together. Got a little warm and they became stuck together, so therefore it's permissible to separate the candles. Could you separate freeze pops for the kids? That's a little more of a complicated shayla, because over there the company, it's machlokes haposkim. Some say it's just to make the delivery easier. The poil, they wanted it to be separated, and others say no. This is for packaging. This is the best way to do it. But clearly the Shulchan Aruch says candles stuck together, you could separate them. But when you're putting the candle in, the Shulchan Aruch says in some Tav Kuf Yudalad, you can't melt the bottom, because that's a separate malacha. Not of heating a fire. To light the flame is fine, but to melt it, that's an issur mareach, which Chazal were not matir on Yom Tov. Okay, it's over. There is going to be a Chazara shir tonight for Semichas Chaver at the Sol Sukkah. Yeah.
Regular shear or what?
It's going to be a Chazara shir for Semichas Chaver.
It's rather impressive that's having a Oda.
Who's having it here?
Yes.
What time?
It's going to be 8 o'clock.
So we'll do it at 9.
So we can go to both places. Ricochet. Our stomachs will be happy too, no doubt.